No prison can hold him.
An escaped Khan, out of control.
He's got a bomb that can wipe out millions of people.
A tough cop, out of his league. A hostage planet.
We are talking Assault on Dome 4, which is also known as simply Dome 4, also known as Chase Morran. Chase Morran being the name of the protagonist character. This one is a 1996 movie directed by Gilbert Poe and features a slew of B-movie talent. Heading up the cast, of course, though, is Bruce Campbell, most notably known for his Evil Dead kind of movies. You've also got Joseph Culp as Chase Morran, our protagonist. You've also got Brian James and James Liu in the cast as well. Now, you often hear the term a die-hard clone used in kind of many films to describe them, but this one is essentially Die Hard in space. But this one goes one step beyond being simply a die-hard clone, because that can be applied to lots of movies where an action just takes place in a closed area. But this movie actually has a hell of a lot of plot elements that are practically the same as Die Hard. Now, what we've got, Chase Morran, played by Joseph Culp, is he's actually an off-duty cop. He's not an ex-cop. He's an off-duty cop. This is like a future, space cop or what have you. And he wants to go and surprise his wife, who works at Dome 4, which is kind of on a planet. So rather than a building, it's a whole planet. And it just so happens that this Dome 4 has been overrun by a gang of criminals led by Alex Windham, played by Bruce Campbell, who want to basically steal some kind of material to make a kind of large bomb. And when Chase Morran arrives there, obviously he has to take out Wyndham's men, talk to him via kind of the radio, very much kind of like Die Hard before actually kind of meeting him, takes his guys out one by one, uses air ducts, things like this. It's lots of things that kind of actually Die Hard actually did. So this was actually a made-for-TV movie. I believe it was made for the Sci-Fi channel, as I say, 1996, and let's be honest, is a cheap Die Hard clone. But what works, first of all, this one has one big tick in its column, and that, of course, is Bruce Campbell. Now, I am a Bruce Campbell fan, so maybe there's a little bit of bias on this one, but he's just so kind of charming to watch, and he has some great lines. Bruce Campbell's performance here is it's actually playing the bad guy, one of the few times he plays like a bad guy. But he's got all the one-liners, and obviously you've got kind of Alan Rickman playing, obviously, Hans Gruber in the original Die Hard, and that was, lauded as one of the kind of the best bad guys. So we've got Bruce Campbell kind of not really copying that character exactly, but he's kind of just doing this kind of cocky, art-loving kind of bad guy who's always kind of got an one-liner, and he's super sort of like cheeky and cocky and stuff like that. So it's a really kind of fun and devilish turn for Bruce Campbell. And if you imagine Bruce Campbell playing kind of like a cheeky devil, this is his kind of character, Alex Windham, in this movie. So that it really does elevate the kind of what to be honest with you is, other than that, it's a somewhat of a mediocre at best kind of Die Hard clone. Maybe there are a couple of other kind of fun things to say about it. I think there are, like I've said, a couple of other kind of familiar faces that you'll see along the way, and there's an interesting plot element here, which they never really do anything with, but I found it interesting, is that the reason why Bruce Campbell's character, Alex Windham, wants to build a bomb is because he wants it as a deterrent, because he wants to be given a planet, this particular planet, where the Earth is essentially overcrowded, and kind of this is why the Earth is now, expanding into different planets, and they've discovered a particular planet which actually has human-like creatures on there. They're very much kind of like humans, but they're not quite as evolved, and he wants to essentially rule this planet, because they'll see him as the kind of a god or whatever, because he's a lot more advanced. So there's an interesting little kind of element to the plot there, although that's practically, you never see the planet, but it's just a little plot element which I thought was quite fun, that maybe could have been expanded upon potentially. Obviously it's a cheap kind of cheap movie really, but nonetheless, I found it somewhat of an interesting kind of bit of exposition there. I think Joseph Culp does an okay job here. He's not given much to do, to be honest with you, and he kind of plays somewhat of a dull character, but I still think, I mean, he's overmatched in regards to charisma with Bruce Campbell, but I think, he does the best with what he can with the kind of the material that he's given, but ultimately he becomes somewhat of a dull leading man, very kind of straight-laced and stuff. He has a choice of a few one-liners, but they just don't have that kind of like that charm or charisma or the fan base that Bruce Campbell kind of did. The sets look extremely cheap. You'll see kind of people hit into walls, and the walls will shake and things like that. Some of the kind of the bad guys, the typical kind of like henchmen that just kind of like run along and get shoot and things like that. The action is quite poorly kind of choreographed. It has a whole kind of like cheap, cheesy sheen to it. People walking along with sunglasses inside when it's fairly dark and in an interior setting. It was the 90s. That's what people did in movies in the 90s. They used to walk around with sunglasses regardless of wherever you went. There's lots of sort of stilted dialogue, cheesy delivery from some of the other cast here. Ultimately, it becomes a lackluster Die Hard clone, just elevated by Bruce Campbell's wild charisma and some plot elements which I think were interesting, and it being such a copy of a Die Hard clone, you almost like spot the kind of the homage to a certain degree. I suppose the only thing I like is that we actually are told the story in flashback whilst Chase Morran is in a court-martial, and I actually kind of quite like the court-martial scenes actually as well. Overall though, I have to say this is probably a below average film. If I take my fandom of Bruce Campbell out of it, although he does elevate it, and certainly this would be a lower mark without him, but I have to be realistic and probably say this is like a 4 out of 10 in regards to a real kind of score here, because it is substandard on most levels. It's not an average film, which is basically my 5 out of 10. It is a substandard film, but Bruce Campbell does elevate it from maybe being a 3 to possibly a 4. But he is fun watching him as the kind of like the charming bad guy. So it's worth checking out just for that. Have you seen this movie, Assault on Dome 4, also known as Chase Morran? 4 out of 10. Let me know what you think. If you have seen it, leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.